and welcome to Microsoft Ignite. We've got a big day ahead and lots in store for you. First, we want to acknowledge that the land where the Microsoft campus is situated was traditionally occupied by the Sammamish, the Duwamish, the Snoqualmie, the Suquamish, the Muckleshoot, the Snohomish, the Tulalip, and other Coast Salish peoples since time immemorial. A people that are still here, continuing to honor and bring to light their ancient heritage. My name is Allison Wines. I'm a senior program manager in our developer tools division. I'm an Asian and white female with dark brown hair wearing a red sleeveless top. I'm an Asian and white female with dark brown hair wearing a red sleeveless top.
And I'm Seth Warren, program manager of the AI Platform Group. I'm a tall Hispanic male wearing a blue shirt, khaki pants,
and a partridge in a pear tree. That was a Microsoft corporate video. Did you like the land acknowledgments? Did you like the description of what she was wearing? Is this going to be our new normal? Yes. This is going to be our new normal. You know what else, too? Where she's talking about all these people who've lived on this land since time immemorial. No, they haven't. People came over on the Bering Land Bridge about 10,000 years ago. Time immemorial. Here, pro tip. Creation myths are still creation myths, even when Indian people do them. One more from Microsoft, shall we? Listen to this.
Hello, everyone. I'm Natalie Gadilla. I'm a Caucasian woman with long blonde hair, and I go by she, her. I'm a product marketing lead here at Microsoft and co-host of the podcast Security Unlocked with this guy.
Yes, that would be me. Hello, everyone. I'm Nick Fillingham. I'm a Caucasian man with glasses and a beard. I go by he, him, and I'm a security evangelist here at Microsoft. We are so excited to be with
Hi, my name's Josh. I'm a homosexual with a sour attitude. I cannot stand these people. I cannot stand these people. Well, I mean, actually, I sort of can. It's getting so ridiculous that every week it's getting easier and easier for me to just laugh at this stuff. I hope that this means that as it gets more ridiculous that we're getting to peak bullshit, but I'm not going to count my chickens before they hatch. So, welcome to Disaffected. I'm Joshua Slocum. This is the show where we talk about politics, culture, and relationships through a psychological lens. A little bit of housekeeping from last week. I'm going to correct myself and rein myself in a little bit. Get your bingo cards out. Remember from last week, guys? My therapist said to me this week, because he watches the show sometimes, he said, when I was talking about women with borderline personality disorder being, what was it exactly that I said? Being likely to instigate false rape claims or things like that. He said to me that he doesn't think this is actually restricted to people who have borderline personality disorder, that he's seen instances of this where a woman who regrets a consensual sexual encounter will reinterpret that retroactively to be a rape. And these are women that he's known or has worked with who he would not describe as having borderline personality disorder. And I take him seriously. So I think that's a good point. And I want to stir that in there. I still think it's more likely that these kinds of false claims, especially a false claim like we described last week when we read some listener mail, that was not just a false claim, but it included a harassment campaign where the accused man's face was put on a wanted poster and it was actually tacked up on bulletin boards. I do think that's a game more likely to be played by borderlines, but his point is well taken. And I also want to pull myself back a little bit from what I said about some of the people in this CBC online magazine spread about gender and hair. And I said something to the effect of that I thought these people looked like they had something in the neighborhood of borderline or histrionic personality disorder. Some of them, yes, but actually, on thinking about it afterward, I don't know and we don't know the difference between what some of these people said to the reporter and how the reporter actually framed this with the photographs and with the selection of quotes. So I need to remember that people are being represented by a third party when they're an interview subject. And the author of the article, Evie Ruddy, could have done anything she wanted. So I'm going to back off on that a little bit. I do think these people are under the sway of something. I do think it has to do with insecurity. I think there's a fairly good likelihood that the kind of people who would be attracted to an opportunity to, frankly, preen and show off that way, may fall into the histrionic category. But on second thought, I wouldn't go quite as far. I wouldn't be as certain as I was last week. So staying with the theme of feedback and viewers, I want to read some mail and some comments that came in after last week's show in response to the last segment where I talked about how understanding Cluster B and understanding the distorted psychology of my mother was necessary for me to move past some of that trauma. So this one comes from, I love this name, Les Be Friends. Okay, we're friends. So she writes, when I learned about narcissistic personality disorder, my childhood made so much more sense. My mother was NPD, and my father may have had a cluster B disorder as well. He was away a lot because of the military. I lived in a constant state of anxiety and depression, but I didn't have the words to describe that as a kid. I coped by disassociating. I lived in a constant state of fantasy. I was always making up scenarios to make my life feel better. My younger sister had a better grip on reality, and she knew she had to get good grades to get out of the situation we were in. Meanwhile, I would miss entire lessons as I doodled storylines in the margins of my worksheets. When I graduated high school, I got as far away as I could, moved to the other coast with no money or any idea of how the world worked. It was hard. I experienced homelessness and I had drug use issues, but looking back now, it made me who I am today. I have a strong core identity, strong moral compass, and I'm in a loving, stable relationship. Though financially I feel behind, I'm growing there too. I'm 40 years old now, and I didn't hear about narcissistic personality disorder until I was in my 30s. Finally, there was something to explain the behavior I had to endure in my early life. That's how I feel about it too. Next one comes from Not a Cat, Disqualified. I've been binging your videos since I found you last week. I left the left about 6 years ago when I detransitioned. It was trans kids. Once I realized they were actually going after people's children, it hit me. The revelation of the coming backlash, the self-serving sadism of it all, smacked me like a hit of Salvia Divinorum. Looking back, the ideology, the cult, it took advantage of my complicated post-traumatic stress disorder and squeezed me into insanity. I spent a few years screaming into the void about it, but to no avail. Maybe some people listened, but I don't seem to have that curb appeal. Pretty sure I have a cluster A disorder, but honestly, I don't care. Your show has made so many things make more sense. Thanks for your time and energy. Thank you, Not a Cat. Now, will you reconsider being a cat, please? We got one from Eleanor. She says, for me, the recovery process was multi-pronged. Emotional, psychological, art-based, therapy-based, physical, although I don't really like that part, sexual, financial, you name it. Everything that was broken needed to be fixed. However, I remember my 50-year-old lesbian therapist neighbor taking me out for dinner. I'm sorry. That's the beginning of a sitcom, my 50-year-old feminist lesbian neighbor. I remember her taking me out to dinner and doing an intervention on me about my partner. my parents, and narcissistic personality disorder. That was in 2000. And had she hit me with thunder, I couldn't have been more stunned. Then 2 years ago, my current therapist telling me about how my mother had borderline personality disorder. Oh, Lord. Those 2 lines they drew for me saved my sanity because suddenly, by virtue of 3 little letters, it wasn't my fault anymore. I never knew, still don't, how much of their shame and guilt I carried. Both times I felt like a divine intervention had lifted tons off my back. So yes, the knowledge was absolutely central to the process, and we need every little help we can get. Thanks for the feedback, all of you. I appreciate that. I'm interested to know that the academic, the intellectual understanding of the framework, the epistemology, the ontology of Cluster B of abnormal psychology was as important to you in personal growth as it was to me. Now, how about we switch gears and pimp children? What do you think? Oh, don't back off like that. It's for a good cause. It's for COVID. Let's listen.
Getting ready to fight COVID.
All of us want to be superheroes. And the most important heroes are those that help others. This year, thousands of kids like us around the world joined the COVID-19 vaccine trial.
Kid power.
And when they did, they became all superheroes. To all the kids who volunteered, we'd like to say,
Thank you! Thank you!
thank you for sharing your superpowers of
Courage.
trying new things,
The ability to save people.
the power to help people,
Helping not just yourself, but many other kids.
to not be scared, be strong, super brave,
Bravery and courage.
a superhero shot, helping everybody, fight coronavirus and help others. You're helping the whole entire world. Thank you. You are all superheroes.
Thank you! Thank you, superheroes!
Thank you. You're awesome.
That, I don't know what to say about that. Is it depressing? It's angry making. It's exploitative. It's pimping. It's pimping children. And it's also parentifying children. We've talked about this before. When parents inappropriately place a child in the role of caretaker or savior or confidant or problem solver, as happens to so many abused children. This is parentifying these children, but it's in some ways it's worse because they're not just being made to take care of daddy and mommy. They're responsible for saving the world. Look at those children. They're open, warm, natural, big hearts that children usually have are being taken advantage of. They've been convinced that it's their job to save the world, to stick their arm out for an experimental drug that they don't even need because they're statistically immune to serious illness or death from COVID. What is wrong with us? Let's actually look at some of the things they said. The most important heroes are those who help others. This is a form of child sacrifice. No, they're not being chucked into a volcano, virgin style. But it's a form of child sacrifice. Not just this promotion, but exposing these children to a chemical and a drug and a preparation they don't need for no reason except to sell this fucking vaccine. The most important things are courage, the ability to save people, to help people. You're helping not just yourself, but other kids. Oh, that's the lie right there. These poor children. This isn't about helping other kids. This is about protecting adults who are terrified of their own mortality, who are actually starting to call children things like vectors and carriers. Yep. I don't want to kill grandma, do we? Helping the whole entire world. Wow. This isn't normal. I hope this doesn't strike anybody listening to this as heartwarming. It's not. It's sick. It should create fear and anger in you. Then, of course, there are the parents. Like this one. Let's put this up on the screen. It's a picture of a little girl. I would say she's about 8 years old. Looks like a school portrait, one of those backgrounds, and she's got a mask across her face. And you can see from her eyes that she's angry. Her eyebrows are down in the middle. And this is what her mother had to say. This is on Twitter. Right? So we're pimping our children online, social media, for mommy points. My kids stayed home and did virtual school for 2020 to 2021 and went into this year very aware of public health directives on masking. This is what happened when the school photo company advised that she could remove her mask from her picture. So this mother is claiming that her little daughter, who's so very aware of masking restrictions, which she shouldn't be, this is something that should never have entered her mind or her world, scowled and made an angry face at the school photographer who said that she could take her mask off for her school picture. God. I'm so proud. I'm so proud of my little girl for being angry and scared and lapping up all of my lies. Shame on you, woman. Shame on you. Of course, there were lots of other munchy mommies. Yeah, that's what I said. Munchy mommies. Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Not like it, not eerily similar. An example of it. Mommy Christina Matthews said, I love this picture. I have spent the last 4 trimesters of school telling my students I only want to see them smile with their eyes. Many kids will become very good at reading people. My theory is that some people are afraid of masks because fake smiles don't reach the eyes. I'm sorry, you know she talks that way. You know that she talks that way. And she's got, well, how do I know she talks that way? Because I know things, first of all. What do you do for a living? I tweet, I talk, and I know things. And she's got, you can't really see it on the screen, but I looked at it close up, her portrait of herself. Head tilt, big smile. Yeah, that's creepy. I only want to see you smile with your eyes. Yes, mommy, what? Huh. Well, it's not just humans, it's also Muppets. Take a look at Big Bird this week. Big Bird. I didn't know Big Bird had a Twitter account. Okay. So Big Bird says, I got the COVID-19 vaccine today. My wing is feeling a little sore, but it'll give my body an extra protective boost that keeps me and others healthy. Miss Erica R. Hill even said, I've been getting vaccines since I was a little bird. I had no idea. Sesame Street. Sesame Street's pimping kids, too. You hear they got that in, right? It's a boost that keeps me and others healthy. I'm going to make sure that you don't give... Well, I don't know who any of these people are who live on Sesame Street anymore, but in my day, Big Bird would be worried about giving Mr. Looper COVID or Gordon or Olivia or Bob. That's not Big Bird's job. Big Bird's job is to be a bird. Unbelievable. There's more. Sesame Street. Sesame Street used to be wholesome. Sesame Street was trustworthy. I grew up on Sesame Street. I know everybody says the things they grew up with were better than the things kids have now. I know. But it really was a more wholesome and trustworthy show when I was watching it in the 1970s. Take a look at this video here from Sesame Street.
Did I have a boo-boo? Oh, no, Amita, this is from my COVID vaccine. My mommy and my papi took me to get it this morning.
Oh, Rosita, that's great. Getting the COVID vaccine is a great way to stay healthy.
See, my mommy and my papi said that it will help keep me, my friends, my neighbors, my abuela, all healthy.
Your parents are absolutely right. You know, COVID vaccines are now available for children 5 years and older. And the more people who get them, the better we're going to be able to help stop the spread of COVID and keep everyone healthy.
Did you see that awkward thing with Sanjay Gupta, our former Surgeon General? The hell is wrong with you, Sanjay? What's wrong with you? What's wrong with all of you? What's wrong with you, Children's Television Workshop? You know, they get away with this stuff because they use the forms and the format that they've always used on Sesame Street, but for different purposes. One of the groundbreaking things about Sesame Street, which I think went on the air in 1969 originally, was how the children who lived on Sesame Street and who were featured on the show looked like the children who lived in New York City. There were white children, a lot of Hispanic children, a lot of Puerto Rican children, black children. These were urban kids. They were working class kids from working class families. And Sesame Street just naturally worked them in the way we naturally live in neighborhoods with each other, teaching American kids like me at least a little bit of Spanish. Right? Because they didn't make it didactic. They didn't translate this. They just worked it in and used the words. And they're doing the same thing here. But it reads to me differently now. When I hear that little Muppet talking about my abuela, mi papi, mi mami. It's my reading. I don't know if this is actually true. But this reads to me more like giving white viewers something to cream their pants over. Look how multicultural we are. Oh, she just said her abuela. Yeah, whatever. Come back for segment 2. See you on the other side. For more conversation on the dark and disordered psychology that shapes today's cultural and political left, subscribe to our weekly audio podcast on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Google Podcasts, and virtually anywhere else you get your podcasts. Let's learn to recognize these dynamics and call them what they are. Subscribe to Disaffected to learn how to break the spell.
We now have a bonus for our supporters. You can help the Disaffected podcast grow and receive invitations for our off-air Zoom hangouts by becoming a supporting member on Patreon or Subscribestar. Patreon users, go to patreon.com/disaffected. Subscribestar users, you can find us at subscribestar.com/disaffected. Check out our webpage at disaffected.fm for the complete list of ways you can help support us, and thank you.
Surgery already? Gosh, it's the 3rd and you had surgery on October 29th.
We're 3 days post-surgery and I look amazing.
Yeah.
I look the best ever. I look so good. I'm really happy.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to look at it because this makes me so emotional. It's so exciting.
This is a girl, a young woman. I don't know how old she is. She could still be a minor. Who's just had her breasts removed. Not just her breasts. Her nipples, too, have been removed. If you are listening and you can't see this, she's standing there with no shirt on, showing off the deep maroon scars underneath her pectoral muscles, where her breasts used to be, where you would expect to find nipples. This is the new non-binary surgery, my friends, where you remove the nipples. Not just the breasts, but the nipples too. There's a line in Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's originating science fiction story, where the monster, the creation, is trying to get the guy who created him to take an interest in him because he's been set out in the world. He's alone. He's not like other people. And he says, "But master, I'm your creature." And in that sense of the word, that older sense of the words, that means I am your creation. What he was saying is, you're responsible for me. Help me. This girl is saying she's happy and she's crying. And it almost seems as if her emotions don't match what she's saying on the outside. It's astonishing. This is the kind of stuff that comes across social media every single day. That was on TikTok. Hundreds of thousands of people have seen it. There's nothing else to say about that. But we've got something coming up for you that's more hopeful. This week, we have the first of our audio-only episodes. And it's an interview with a listener, one of you, who has a daughter who believes she's trans. And going to give you a little preview of what you're going to get in this episode.
So she told me the other day, she was sitting down here in the living room with me for a change. And we were having a conversation. And she's like, I'm going to be this for Halloween. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. What is that? Because I haven't heard of it. And it's evidently a character from some silly game. And she's like, I'm going to be a girl. Well, stupid me made the comment of, you are a girl.
You just couldn't help yourself, could you?
No, I couldn't, because I love walking into shit. And it all just blew up.
So, that's your preview. You're only going to be able to get our audio episodes on audio, on podcast. So be sure that you subscribe to us on iTunes, Pandora, Spotify, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio. These were not going to be available to you on YouTube. They're not going to be on any video platform. So be sure to subscribe to us there. And we look forward to bringing you more. Before I jump into my next topic here, I want to give you something else hopeful. When I was driving into the studio this morning, out on one of the main thoroughfares here near Burlington was about 24 people, all holding up signs protesting vaccine mandates and especially the experimentation on children. These were all middle-aged parents. They looked like typical Vermonters. There were signs that said things like, COVID is more than 99% survivable. Children are not for experimentation. Mandates are fascism. I mean, I was blown away. This is the first opposition I have seen in the bluest blue part of the bluest state in the union. And I rolled my windows down and just whooped and hollered for these people. I feel like we might be making progress. Excuse me. So that makes me happy. There's a lot to be upset about, but there seem to be some glimmers of hope. But lest I mislead you, let's get back into misery. In The Atlantic this week, the magazine The Atlantic, I saw a story that is just, well, what I said on social media when I shared the story is you've got to read the whole thing. You won't believe what I say about it. And obviously, I'm going to have to try to sell you. So let's do it. This story is titled, "Getting Back to Normal is Only Possible Until You Test Positive. I was ultra careful for 18 months. Then I got COVID." This is by Alexis C. Madrigal. And the scene setter for this is about his, it's partially about his decision over whether to attend a wedding, and then it just gets more dramatic from there. Quote, "When I first received the invitation to the wedding where I would eventually get COVID, I was on the fence about attending at all. My best friend had gone through a tough divorce and was remarrying. I was thrilled for him. His wedding had been put off repeatedly because of COVID, and this was the couple's second try at a real ceremony. As a bonus, the wedding would take place in New Orleans, where my friend lives. I hadn't seen him since before the pandemic. New Orleans is a miraculous place and my favorite city to visit in America. The downside, of course, was the risk of exposure to COVID. Sure, I'm vaccinated. 2 shots of Pfizer. And the wedding's other attendees would all be vaccinated too. But breakthrough cases happen, and we'd be in New Orleans in October, a place where cases were still high and vaccination was inconsistent. One could not expect to not get exposed to COVID. But then I reasoned both with myself and with my wife. COVID was unlikely to kill me, a vaccinated 39-year-old endurance athlete. I would be fine, and even if I gave the coronavirus to any of my family members, they too would almost certainly be fine. My wife is vaccinated, and our young children's risk of serious illness, while not non-existent, is very low." He's right. And that is the kind of reasoning that people ought to be doing. But it didn't work. He then goes on to talk about how he endlessly dithered over this decision about whether it was safe to go to New Orleans and attend his best friend's wedding, how hard it was to decide whether to buy plane tickets, and how frightened he was because he'd have to do a changeover in Las Vegas. No, it was not explained why that was so frightening, but it was. Let's put up on the screen one of the quotes here. "The really vulnerable were getting boosters. Kid vaccinations were on the horizon. Filled with a surge of love for my friends in New Orleans, in a sense that, you know what? I'm ready to nose out into a new tier of risk. I booked a flight. I'd be going solo." Can you hear the orchestral swell in the background? As if this were the most dramatic story arc presented. "Kid vaccinations were on the horizon. Why do you care, Alexis? You just said a few paragraphs ago, I'll tell you what you said. You said, and our young children's risk of serious illness, while not non-existent, is very low. So why are you going on about the kid vaccines? Do you know? Ready to nose out into a new tier of risk. These people think buying an off-brand of dish detergent is a risk. Listen to this. Quote, "As the day approached, my wife and I had not run through every scenario. I still was not precisely sure how the wedding would work COVID-wise. My friend is a doctor, and I knew the crowd would mostly be New York and California people. There would be no anti-vaxxers among the guests, and the invitation said they'd follow the local public health protocols. And I think I didn't want to know too much. Can you hear it? He knew he was going to be safe because it would mostly be New York and California people, not those nasty, dirty anti-vaxxers from flyover states in the benighted South. God. So he did go. He did go. Quote, I spent hours in an N95 mask in the Las Vegas airport and on planes before arriving in Louisiana and heading to the welcome drinks. You goddamn tool. I hope people pointed and laughed at you. I can't stand those N95 masks. I see some people walking around with them. They look like those dudes on the back pages of the old gay hookup magazines before we had apps like Grindr and stuff. You know, the jockstrap sniffing fetishists. Oh, you didn't know about that? Now you do. You're welcome. They look like they've got a jockstrap on their face. I used to think it was a face bra, but now it's a face jockstrap. More from Alexis. Quote, so this is him getting to the wedding. Quote, I walked in and saw that people were all inside, fairly densely packed in a big room. No one was wearing a mask. Everyone was celebrating like people who haven't seen one another for a long time, ready for a wedding weekend in the greatest city in America. For some reason, I was shocked. Quote, I don't know why I didn't expect it to look like that. Maybe I thought we'd be in a garden under some nice string lights, mostly keeping masks on, in that maybe it helps way. I almost turned around and begged off the night of drinks, figuring the next day would be less risky. For what? And why would tomorrow be less risky? Nothing is making sense here. Then he spends a couple paragraphs talking about how worried his wife was the whole time he was gone, how he was worried. And did he really mean to take on this much risk? Well, there's a reason for some of this hysteria. It's because of what he does for a living. Quote, after spending so much of my time studying COVID, being part of a response with the COVID tracking project, and writing many stories about the pandemic, I was over it. I was done. I don't know that I could have admitted that to myself, but I just wanted it all to go away. A normal and natural feeling, Alexis. But you got yourself worked up because you had your nose stuck in this bullshit the entire time and your paycheck depends on it. And now your emotions are tugging with your intellect. You're not the only one. A lot of people are in that situation. You're not doing a very good job leading yourself out of it, though. And you know what, Alexis? It can be over. Do you know how it can be over? When you decide. When you decide to stop living this way. That's when it's over, Alexis. Not when Anthony Fauci says. Not when your wife says. Not when your own paranoid terror says. When you decide you're not going to live this way anymore, that's when it's over. So he goes back home, and on return, he made sure to do a PCR test at the airport. Polymerase chain reaction, the one that can't distinguish between coronavirus and flu virus, and the one that gives false positives all the time because they run it for so many cycles that it amplifies little pieces of DNA that don't even actually show that you have an active infection of COVID. That's the test he took. That's the test they're having you take. Do you know that? Did you know that? It doesn't actually diagnose whether you have an active COVID infection because it's being misused. Then he started to get what felt like a cold. Quote, "The next day, my symptoms were about the same. I did an intense Peloton workout." Jesus Christ. I'm sorry I'm breaking here in the middle of it, you guys. I should have done a run through because I forgot how ridiculous. This is like watching a Saturday Night Live parody of this kind of people when Saturday Night Live was actually funny. I did an intense Peloton workout, and it felt fine, though maybe my legs were a little slow. I wasn't eager to test again. A negative PCR test seemed good enough. But my wife had heard me cough, one of only maybe 20 coughs through my whole sickness, and said, "Couldn't you take another antigen test?" Jesus Christ, there's two of these cuckoo birds in the same house. Couldn't you take another antigen test? So then he tested positive. And he actually rented an apartment away from his wife and kids. Quote, "I was able to find a long-term rental on our block thanks to an angelic neighbor. I set my bags down inside and tried to figure out what I had to do. The worst case scenario that I'd imagined was that I'd get sick mildly, as I did. I ended up taking one day off from work, and even that was more of a precaution. I felt pretty sick, like when you have a cold, but I've probably been sicker 15 times as an adult." So which is it, pretty sick or you've been sicker? Oh, my God. He claims his kids had to leave school. They had to isolate. And his wife had to stay home and isolate too. I don't think they've seen each other yet. I mean, this long-term, I don't. More. Quote, "But for me, the very worst part was my children. They knew cognitively that I was vaccinated and unlikely to get really sick. That said, COVID-19 for them is a terrible thing. The past year and a half of their lives have been disrupted by this virus. They take precautions every single day not to have this happen. It's terrible for them because of you and your wife and your school system and fully half this country that calls itself leftist, liberal, or Democrat. You did this. You did this to your children. You've done it to every child in this country." Quote, "They, the children, reacted in different ways. My non-binary 8-year-old was so mad and maybe so scared that they could barely look at me. My 5-year-old daughter proved her status as the ultimate ride or die kid." How old are you, Alexis? Why are you talking this way? "She brought a chair down the street so she could sit 20 feet away from me outside in her mask as I sat on the porch in an N95. I'm not sure which reaction was more heartbreaking. It was as if one never wanted to see me again and the other didn't want to let me out of her sight. You know, you're running a risk here, Alexis. Your non-binary 8-year-old child. If that child grows up and realizes what a fucking wackadoodle you are and wonders why you let him or her, because we don't know, it's just they, isn't it? It's not a real human child who's a boy or a girl, it's just a they. They might wonder why you let them get into this delusion so far that you couldn't even acknowledge their actual sex. That's what you should be worried about, what your children are going to think about you when they grow up and look back with adult eyes. My non-binary child. You know where he lives, don't you? Take a guess. I can think of 3 or 4 guesses that would be pretty good, but just take a minute and take a guess. Write your answers down. He's in the San Francisco Bay Area, naturally. And he laments the logistical nightmare of what happens when you test positive, but is completely unaware of how he himself and everybody he lives with in that crazy, freakish town is the machine that has made this world in America go crazy. One more quote before we finish. In social worlds like mine, though, where most people do work from home, where people have minimized risk and gotten vaccinated, we're at a weird moment. Things aren't likely to change that much for quite some time. Even after however many kids get vaccinated, there will still be breakthrough infections. Other variants could spread. Maybe we're in this space for another year or 2 or 3. One way to put the question of endemicity is, when do we start treating COVID like other respiratory illnesses? When you stop this, Alexis. See you after the break. For more conversation on the dark and disordered psychology that shapes today's cultural and political left, subscribe to our weekly audio podcast on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Google Podcasts, and virtually anywhere else you get your podcasts. Let's learn to recognize these dynamics and call them what they are. Subscribe to Disaffected to learn how to break the spell.
We now have a bonus for our supporters. You can help the Disaffected podcast grow and receive invitations for our off-air Zoom hangouts by becoming a supporting member on Patreon or Subscribestar. Patreon users, go to patreon.com/disaffected. Subscribestar users, you can find us at subscribestar.com/disaffected. Check out our webpage at disaffected.fm for the complete list of ways you can help support us. And thank you.
Okay, so that last promo that you just saw, this is where we ask you for money. We had a Zoom hangout today for our donors only. It was good to see you all. We have one every week, and that's a perk you get for supporting this show, and we'd love your support. You can come to us through patreon.com/disaffected or subscribestar.com/disaffected. So I want to end this show with this segment talking about the tension between plain talk and diplomatic talk. And I'll start with a little funny. I ran a poll on Twitter. I love these Twitter polls. And, you know, just for shits and giggles, but there's a serious point to it. So the poll, I asked a poll question. Some listeners to Disaffected think that I go too far. What do you think? And your choices were too catty, just right, or not catty enough. And the results are in. 10% of you who are wrong think I'm too catty. 26% of you who, well, I don't know if you're right or wrong, but I'm kind of more on your side. You think I'm not catty enough. But 64% of you think I'm just right. So apparently I have found the Goldilocks position of bitch faggotry. You're welcome. There's always a push and pull between people who are blunt the way I am and people who are diplomatic. I've said before that I think we need both types of people. And I mean it when I say that. I'm not just saying it so that I can make myself sound reasonable to argue for my own point. I see this professionally and I see it personally. There are times and places where a balls to the wall approach is not productive. My way of doing things is not always the best way given whatever context you're in. But it is also true that continually abiding by the rules of, and I wish you could hear the inappropriate capital letters I'm putting on these phrases, but very respectable conversation is not always the right way either. We need people who will smooth over, and we need people who will put bumps in the road. I tend to put more bumps in the road. I am capable of doing it differently too. But the mainstream appetite is, it seems to me, very much more for the very respectable conversation. Nobody wants to say anything too frank, too candid. And although I think a lot of people don't mean to do this, what ends up happening is that they just don't tell the truth. They let elisions go by. They turn a blind eye to people who are lying. They allow people who use sophisticated cocktail party language to get away with outrageous moral insults and character degradation of people who don't deserve it. And then they point at people like me and say, we are the problem, when we say bullshit. And I've got somebody I want to tell you about, and I've got a few words for him today, too. His name is Thomas Chatterton Williams. He's a writer for The Atlantic magazine. He's also written a book. And I followed him on Twitter for a while. He's a biracial black man, and he's made some insightful comments on race relations in America. But they're not as insightful as he thinks they are. Because I think that the goal he presents, being a public commentator, is different from his actual goal. And I'm going to start out with an example. Let's put a tweet up on the screen. He said this week, the word woke needs to be retired. We need fresher, more specific language. No, we don't. We do need more specific language, but we don't need to retire the word woke. Why? Because now people know what it means. Now its real definition, which is censorship, puritanism, and moral grandstanding, has become widely known and widely accepted. Why do you want to take that from us? James Lindsay calls these people crypto woke. And what he means by that is they claim to be anti-woke. They claim to be against the excesses of the politically correct left, which is now the mainstream. But every time those of us who are pushing back on that culture get a foothold in, they come for us. They tell us we're talking too loudly. We're ruining the party. We're making them look bad. We're dragging the tone down. The word woke needs to be retired. I find it very interesting that that kind of criticism comes out just as soon as we start having success in getting people to use the word for what it really means. And it does make me question the motivations of people who make these criticisms. We are not in an academic salon. We are in the real world. Academics and jet-setting writers like Mr. Williams are the ones who helped get us into this mess. They are certainly not going to help us get out. They don't want to help us get out. People like this are asking you to lay down your weapons, to lay down your tools at the precise moment that you are successfully defending yourself with those weapons and with those tools. Because you are successfully defending yourself. That's why they want you to lay them down. They won't come right out and say it, though, of course, right? Well, he's not saying that, is he? He's just saying we need a new word. Well, if you take it at face value, but if you read between the lines and you use a bit of a discernment, you can see what he's really saying. And people like this will say they don't like this kind of talk because it's not sophisticated, it's not nuanced. No. They don't like it because they find it distasteful. This is about social class. That's not all Mr. Williams has been up to this week. He has also tweeted, he did this just today. There was a tweet from an account I follow on Twitter, who's a mom and a housewife. She's got a couple thousand followers, not a big account, but a lot of people I follow her too. She talks a lot of straight common sense. And she lives in the state of Hawaii and has described the draconian way in which the state has enforced their COVID protocols up to and including things like being at the airport and turning doctors who live in Hawaii away after they get off the plane because they couldn't produce their papers. And that these things change every week according to the health department, and that you can't get in anywhere except for places like grocery stores unless you show vaccine papers. She's tired of it. She wants out. She says our life and our business has been ruined. And her sin was to show a picture of herself wearing a yellow star on her breast that said not vaccinated. Oh, I know. Some of you find that very distasteful. I get it. I don't find it as distasteful as you. I do not find it an absolutely inapt comparison the way some of you do, but I do understand that you feel that way. We're not going to settle our differences on that one. We don't have to. But why did he do this? Thomas Chatterton Williams has 111,000 followers on Twitter. This woman has a few thousand. Why did he do it? To instigate a pile-on so that she would be seen as an anti-Semite, a moral hysteric. Oh, I'm sure he'd object. I'm sure he may be objecting now if he sees this. Oh, no, that's not what I meant. You knew that would be the effect. You knew the viciousness that you were exposing this woman to. He questioned her mental sanity. He said he thought she'd gone insane. And sure enough, so did a whole bunch of other people. I can't take people like this seriously because they're grasping. They're class climbers. They want very much to be part of the world traveler white wine and loafers set. That's who they care about. And they don't care about shitting on little people who are beneath them in order to get there. Do you think we can't see the vanity, Mr. Williams? The constant profile picture changes. 1 minute, you're taking photographs of the French Alps from inside a train car with a carefully positioned glass of Prosecco on your table. Then the next minute, you're tweeting about how Americans should travel more because if they spent any time around the French like he did, they'd see how ridiculous it was to get worked up about wokeism. Or how about the pictures of you on a beach with your carefully distressed jeans and your LL Bean penny loafers without socks, again with the ubiquitous glass of white wine, and your cap that makes sure you centered the Polo brand name in the middle of it? There's a word for this. It's piss elegant. Yeah, I mean to be coarse. I do mean to bring the tone down. I'm perfectly capable of talking in that language too. I just choose not to. I used to do it. That was more than half of what I wanted to get out of being at college at Sarah Lawrence. I wanted to be the bright spark at the cocktail party. I wanted to be in the academic salons. I like thinking. I like fascinating topics. I like cosmopolitan things. I just don't like the culture that surrounds the fetishization of those things as class markers. Another thing about straight talk is that sometimes straight talk can do something that nothing else can do. You hear this a lot. The conventional wisdom might be expressed by using an aphorism like, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar, which first of all isn't true. Have you ever tried to catch fruit flies with honey versus vinegar? They go for the vinegar. I swear. That isn't always true. We need a balance. I'm not going to give you that balance because it isn't my job. There are other people to do that for me. And there's a difference between being more measured and being more moderate and being prissy and piss elegant and looking down your nose at other people. We don't need any more of that. But it isn't always true. You hear this also. You hear it told to parents like the one that I spoke to Sue, that you'll hear in the audio-only episode that we've got coming out this week that we promoted earlier. They say it to people like her. They say, well, you have to affirm your daughter's transness. You have to affirm her pronouns, because if you don't, you'll just drive her away. She'll hate you and she'll only get deeper. Really? So you can never say no? Anytime a child expresses a lot of emotion to you, if you ever say no to that, they're only going to hate you? So you just can't say no? Nonsense. Let me tell you a couple of quick stories about people who talked really straight to me in a way that I hated when it happened, and who planted a seed that did me much more good than coddling and comforting would do. When I was in college in Sarah Lawrence, we had Sarah Lawrence is the sister college to Oxford, and they use something called the DON system, D-O-N. That means advisor. You get a DON. Usually only in graduate school in America do you get an advisor, but you got one who stayed with you throughout your undergraduate years at Sarah Lawrence College. My Don Mary was a cultural anthropologist, wonderful woman. And she took a special interest in me. And I turned in a bad paper one day. I phoned it in. I almost never do that. I had an almost perfect GPA, maybe in part because of how Mary responded to me. I got the paper back the next week, and when I looked at it, it was full of red pen. Not pencil, pen. No, unsupported. What? And there was a note at the bottom, and it said, Josh, don't ever turn something like this into me again. You are capable of quality work, and I expect quality work. Mary. I was humiliated. I cried. I went back to my dorm room and I cried in shame. I was in my early 20s. She was right. And I never, ever pulled that shit again. When I graduated college, I wanted to get a job as a photographer for a newspaper. And I had studied fine art photography in college. I did a lot of still lifes. Still lifes, how they'd look if John Waters did them. Mine were sort of absurdist, almost Dada. They weren't exactly the kind of thing that would get you a job as a photojournalist, but what I did was even stupider. I wanted this job, and instead of nicely organizing my photographs into a portfolio, putting it in sleeves and binders, annotating it, I just took all of these prints that I'd made. They were good prints. I mean, they were good quality prints. I made them in the darkroom by hand, but I just stuck them in a Kodak's box of C41 paper. Just thrown in there. Just left it on the desk with a note. Well, a week later, I got a voicemail message to come pick up my box. And it said inside, thank you for your interest in the job. I don't think it's a good fit. By the way, a note of advice for your career. Presentation counts. This is not presentation. No, it wasn't. And I never pulled that shit again either. It stung, it embarrassed, and it humiliated. And you know why? Because it showed me what I did to myself. I didn't like it. It did hurt. And I got over it. And I got better. And I thank these people for telling it to me straight. And I'm going to leave you on a funny note. We have one final clip of somebody impersonating me doing the voice.
One of the reasons things feel extra hard is due to the fact that many of us are trying our very best by getting the vaccine, following strict safety measures, wearing masks, isolating when necessary, and educating our friends and family. But there are so many other people that are living their lives without a care in the world and don't believe that COVID is dangerous. The folks that are being extra safe and careful are carrying the burden, while others don't feel the weight of being responsible. The efforts of people being careful are being washed away by people who are being careless.
That's not me, is it? You're not me, soy boy. I just snorted, didn't I? Well, that's it. That's the show. Thanks for joining me, everybody. I'll see you next week. For more conversation on the dark and disordered psychology that shapes today's cultural and political left, subscribe to our weekly audio podcast on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Google Podcasts, and virtually anywhere else you get your podcasts. Let's learn to recognize these dynamics and call them what they are. Subscribe to Disaffected to learn how to break the spell.
We now have a bonus for our supporters. You can help the Disaffected podcast grow and receive invitations for our off-air Zoom hangouts by becoming a supporting member on Patreon or Subscribestar. Patreon users, go to patreon.com/disaffected. Subscribestar users, you can find us at subscribestar.com/disaffected. Check out our webpage at disaffected.fm for the complete list of ways you can help support us, and thank you.